Good evening. Welcome to Left, Right and Centre. I'm Vishnu Shom. On the programme tonight, some call it a great purge of key chapters in school history textbooks on everything from Mughal history to democracy and diversity. Is there a revision of history in our textbooks, or is this what the NCERT calls rationalisation? That's our top debate, and we'll be joined by the NCERT chairperson shortly. Next on the programme, at 9:30 p.m, India's drug controller clears the Tamil Nadu-based company whose eye drops may have caused deaths in the United States. American authorities slammed their manufacturing process. They'd come to Tamil Nadu to actually check out how this drug was being manufactured. But this is now the third time when Indian-made drugs have allegedly caused deaths abroad. This is bad news at many levels. Obviously, safety in healthcare is primary. But India is known as the world's pharmacy, and there have been two previous reports of Indian-made drugs causing deaths in the Gambia in Africa and in Uzbekistan. And now this report from the United States. It is very serious. We'll be looking at that second on this program. But first up is the revision of school textbooks, a political agenda. That's what we are looking at. We're also joined now by a very special guest. We're joined by the NCERT chairperson. Thanks very much for being with us on this program. So let me ask you my first question, Dr. Dinesh Saklani, which is this. Why has the NCERT modified chapters on Mughal Empire or on the Mughal Empire from class 12 history books? Why have these been removed at all?
Yeah, you know, this is a very narrow question. Why do you see only that the Mughal chapters have been removed? This is a rationalization process across the subject and across the classes. So, why focus on Mughal? My question is that why focus on Mughal chapters only?
So, sir, the answer to that question is the focus is on Mughals because the suggestion by some is that Mughal history is a chapter in our history that needs to be forgotten. That's a political suggestion made by certain parties. That is what some quarters say, and hence I'm asking you that question.
This is baseless allegation by ignorant people. They must go by the rationalization process. Last year we have amply clarified to the nation and society as a whole for 2-3 months in print media and electronic media that a rationalization process has been adopted in view of the pandemic, COVID pandemic. That's because our students had a very traumatic situation and lot of learning loss and time loss was there. So it was felt that in order to help our students, how can we minimize the content load from the textbooks? NEP also recommends that the content load should not be there. So in that process, it was realized that we should help our students by removing the repetition and overlapping. So in that process, the experts from the across nation were invited, and they were given the textbooks to examine. They examined the textbooks and found out that yes, if somewhere this context or text has been already studied by the students, it is not required at further level. So this was the recommendation of the professionals, and it was not that NCERT is doing selectively. This is baseless argument and accusation. I don't go by this, and people must be rational enough to understand the rationalization process. It is amply cleared last year by us that for 3 months we replied to the nation and to the society as a whole.
Okay,
and
but
society
But sir, why has the chapter democracy and diversity in class 10 and 11 been removed?
The same way. Yeah, same. You know, I have already replied to your question. Across the subject and across the classes, the process has been adopted, and whatever was felt that it can be done away with this time to minimize the content load of the textbook, that was done. That was recommended by the professional committees of the experts, and in that light, it was done. Yes.
So, sir, one final question just to summarize. Removal of Central Islamic lands, clash of cultures, democracy and diversity, kings and chronicles, the Mughal courts. So not just class 10 and 12, class 10 and it's not just class 12, it's class 10, 11 and 12. all of these chapters have been removed or modified just to help students. That's what you're trying to say.
Not only this, I have already asked and clarified that across this, why don't you talk about the mathematics? Why don't you talk about the physics? Why don't you talk about the biology? Why don't you talk about the economics? Why don't you talk about the geography? Why selectively these questions are being raised and raised time and again? Last year we clarified this, that this is across the subject and across the classes. So it was an intention to get away from the traumatic situation which our students undergone, and it was the duty of the nation to help the students in this tough period, and we helped, and the nation agreed to this. In fact, it was a welcome step from across the society. Maximum people we got that it was a welcome step that we helped our students, and this is our sacred duty to help our students in the learning process. Okay. And to cover up the time loss and learning loss. It was only in that spirit whatever has been done. That's why you call it a rationalization process, nothing else.
All right, Professor Saklani, thank you very much for sharing that view of the NCERT. Not a political process, he says. Joining us now, General Zamiruddin Shah, is the former Vice Chancellor of Aligarh Muslim University, Professor Mridula Mukherjee, Professor C.B. Sharma, Professor of Education at IGNOU, and J.S. Rajput, former Director at NCERT. General Shah, let me come to you first. Is the revision of school textbooks, primarily in history, part of a political agenda, in your opinion?
I don't comment on politics. I'll only comment on history. History is what we learn from the past, whether it's good or bad. If you establish a 600-year gap in the historical period, will it convey the right message? It might do it in India, but it won't do it to the historians all over the world. And this gap is of a period where the rule was not entirely of Muslims. It was 40% was Rajputs and other Indian castes, especially the Kayas. The generals in the Mughal army were Rajputs, and so were the generals in Shivaji's army. So calling it a Muslim rule is putting a large gap on history, and I would say it is a question of leaving out important facets of history.
Okay.
Repetition, nobody's talking of repetition. Of course, repetition has to be avoided. But I don't think this is a question of repetition. This is a question of leaving out a certain portion of our history, whether good or bad. That is for historians to judge.
J.S. Rajput, would you agree that you can't have several hundred years of our history just left out? I noticed General Shah being very deft in bypassing the political sort of question I asked him. That's his prerogative. But I think he answers the question in an interesting way when he talks about fact, and he says that factually you cannot have a period of our history not there in textbooks. Why is this happening now, sir? J.S. Rajput.
The very explanation, the idea or the thought that General Sahab has presented, the most decent word that I can use is simple ignorance. Nobody can remove 600 years of history. There is no need to do it. But let me tell General Sahab also that there is no think tank with greater credibility in India or even outside in school education at the level of NCERT. It has a credibility. It is full of experts, internationally sought out experts who examine everything. It's a research organization. They research everything, what is suitable to the children, what is creating more workload on children, all those things. And that is why we have departments of psychology, physiology, everything. Now, NCERT never had this intention. I also had removed certain paragraphs. And if you have time, let me tell you, these paragraphs have humiliated 6 gurus. They were historically incorrect facts. They said in history books that all the Tirthankars of the Jain Samaj, and today is Bhagavan Mahavir's birth, they said all the Tirthankars are imaginary, just to let their religion be of greater years.
No, but sir, your key point, sir, I'm trying to understand your point.
Now, these are incorrect.
Right. Are you suggesting, sir, that the parts which have been deleted are incorrect?
No, I am not saying this. Deletions will take place, and the rationalization will take place. As the director NCERT had said, rationalization takes place by academics, not by politicians. Politicians are military generals. It is done by those who have devoted a lifetime to education. People like me who served NCERT for more than 33 years, there are people who have served for more than 40 years. They all come, experts come from every nook and corner of the country. And there are 3 or 4 stages through which every textbook passes.
Okay.
We see in the whole thing, Mughal period will definitely remain, but the class may be different. That is the issue to be found out.
Professor Mukherjee.
It's not correct to say that a gap has been created. I definitely disagree with this view that there is a gap will be there. There will be no gap, though I am not in NCERT, but I am confident about NCERT.
Professor Mukherjee, do you agree that there will be no gap over there despite the fact that these chapters are all taken out? There will be no gap.
Let me just explain what is the syllabus in class 11 and 12 for history. These are students who choose history as a subject for specialization in class 11 and 12. They are asked to do ancient India, medieval India and modern India. These are at a high level of sophistication. Yes, in class 6, 7 and 8, ancient, medieval and modern India all have been taught. How is it that the repetition is only found in one chapter from a book on the medieval period for class 11? Otherwise, the entire syllabus is a repetition of class 6, 7 and 8. That way you should remove the whole history course because they have done it in 6, 7 and 8. This is like saying if you've done mathematics or arithmetic in class 3 and 4, you can't do it at a higher level in class 11 and 12. And let me also tell you the absurdity of the way this chapter has been dropped. I have looked at that book. This chapter was a prelude to another chapter on the agrarian system of the Mughals. This chapter is called Kings and Chronicles. In fact, it talks about how Mughal history is constructed on the basis of the chronicles which have been left behind. So it's actually teaching children how history is written. It's a very interesting chapter. Anyway, dropping it means they suddenly come to agrarian system of the Mughals without knowing anything about Mughals. They are supposed to remember what they studied in class 7 at a very simple level now to give for the board exam. So, I mean, this is not the way rationalization is done. I can understand COVID, all these reasons which are given. I'm sure they're all very legitimate reasons. I have no reason to quarrel with it. But when to rationalize, the only thing that you can find worthy of dropping in 3 books, 3 long books on medieval, ancient and modern is 1 chapter on the Mughals, questions will be asked. The repetition is there right through.
Okay.
Not only in this. So why do you select this? Obviously there is a motive. And we all know, and the glee with which it is being treated by the political circles. Are we to close our ears? From the morning, the political leaders are going, they are gloating over the fact that Mughals are being left out of history. So are we not to listen to the news?
Professor Sharma, it is a fact that many in the Sangh, in the BJP, Hindutva votaries, call them what you want, have often argued that NCERT texts give too much importance to the Mughal period, and there are many in the RSS, for example, who say that there needs to be much more of a focus on the achievements of, say, an ancient India, a Hindu view, as it were, and that it is in this context that there needs to be a revision. So therefore, do you believe that the revision taking place in history textbooks now is an extension of that belief?
Vishnu, I will not I will take a very academic point of view, and I will also like to go into the history of curriculum design in India. I'm sure many people don't know the process, how it started. A couple of professors wrote a letter to the Minister for Education and said, we want history books to be written in a particular manner, and they were hired to write history books. Now, that was the process through which we started writing history textbooks. But don't forget that many events, many communities, many periods have been left out for political reasons. This is not the method of writing textbooks across the world. Look at the British textbooks, look at the Finnish textbooks of the school children, and you will find they are more evenly distributed in period. But Indian textbooks are not. That is why we are finding so much of hue and cry. There is a process, and I completely agree with Professor Klani, the director of NCERT, that when you start doing that, it hurts some people. It hurts some people. So
you're not saying that.
At some point of time, this will happen. Let me mention a fact. The National Curriculum Framework was framed in 2000. Professor Rajput is here on this platform. And 2005, when there was a change in government, the National Curriculum Framework was changed again. We say to the nation that we change National Curriculum Framework every 10 years. What I want to hint at is, Som, that we have made school education too politicized, and that is why all this you and
So, sir,
leave it to the academics, and they will do.
Professor Rajput, we've made school education too politicized. Is a learning of Mughal history politicized?
Yes, it was politicized. It is not being politicized.
Yes.
1970 onwards, it was politicized to an extent that you will be shocked to find out that in one chapter in class 12 book, there were two photographs. One was of Gandhi, other was of Lenin. Gandhi's photograph covered quarter of the page, and after 2 pages, Lenin was in full page. Now it impacts the children, and you know how it impacts. The books need to be changed, and I had also done it because there were references to Sikh gurus which said that the guru laid waste the entire province of this and this. He looted the things. Similarly, about the Jat
So you feel that there was disproportionate representation? I take that.
I feel yes.
Okay, sir, hold on half a second. Professor
Must
Rajput,
be
1
removed
second.
from history textbooks.
Sure, I'll come back to you. General Shah, as I understand it, some of the key portions dropped by NCERT, not just history, but political science, sociology textbooks also include mention, for example, of the 2002 Gujarat riots, certain quotes of Nehru, issues linked to caste oppression, and we've discussed Mughal history. So therefore, how would you respond to those who say that the education of our children is incomplete without mention of this?
It is. I mean, the children must study all that was good or bad. Those who forget history are bound to repeat it. Let me stress that again. We should now look at Europe. A period was called the Dark Period, where Europe was constantly at war. There was plague. There was all sorts of disorders. But have the European history omitted the Dark Period? No. They have learned lessons from it. So I would say that India's glorious past must be stressed. I don't say it should not. Unfortunately, the British did not stress it. It has to be stressed, but you cannot create a gap in the history, whether it's Mughal or anywhere else. I think it is suffering from an inferiority complex. We should avoid that, and this instruction, I think, should be cancelled.
Professor Sharma, our former Vice President Venkaiah Naidu had spoken at a public event on Indianization of education, saying that India, we need, as a country, all of us need to come out of the shackles of the imperial legacy of Thomas Macaulay and find a way back to our roots. And then his exact quote was, "This might be called saffronization, but what's wrong with it?" Right? But what's wrong with saffron? That's what he said. So my question is this: Is this revision part of a process of quote unquote saffronizing our education system?
No, I won't call it saffronization. I will definitely call it Indianization. The textbook have been written by people who held a certain political point of view. And I have quarreled with them that they had more allegiance to a particular political ideology, a party, than writing textbook for children. I mean, again, I will tell Professor Rajput that when he was director and he came out with the National Curriculum Framework in 2000, the life of a National Curriculum Framework is 10 years. Why was it changed in 2005? Again, I have the same answer that, look, people who are neutral and want to write either sociology or political science or history were deliberately kept out of the whole process, and people of a particular ideology were put in, and those who opposed them were again excluded from the process. I think at the moment the process is to give due place, to give due representation to all those who contributed to national freedom struggle or to the knowledge corpus of India. Look at the textbook on ancient India. It's about 150 pages. Look at the textbook on medieval India. It is 400 pages. What is this? The great Mughals, but Ashok. Why is that? What I will say is that the whole process of textbook writing, curriculum design has been biased and politically motivated, and that is why. Why was the NCERT changed after 2004 elections? Let Professor Rajput answer that. And 2005, all the textbooks were changed. I believe the process should be left to academics who do not really subscribe to one political ideology, and they have the children in mind, they have the national interest in mind, and they keep
but
nation
Professor
first.
Sharma, it's I mean, who's political and who's not? I mean, if you are suggesting, and I know you've not said it in as many words, that a historian like Professor Mukherjee represents a particular political mindset, then some would suggest that you represent another one. At the end of the day, history is in a sense, history is fact. History is a science by itself. It is learning, and the idea is to establish these facts on a piece of paper, and therefore. But how does it help us as a country? Also, my only submission, sir, and please answer. My only submission, sir, is that as a country, shouldn't we present both facts, both views? Why delete?
Completely agree with you. Both.
Why delete democracy and diversity? Right? In class 10 and 11, why do that?
All points of view must come into the textbook so that children are left to themselves to hold their view. We bias them. And that is my complaint with the whole system of textbook curriculum design and textbook writing till now. Why have we excluded certain points of view, certain communities, and also what Rajput Sahib has already said, that we castigated certain communities of certain wrongdoings to the nation. That was wrong. And what I have quarrels is...
No, so you delete a chapter on Mughal history.
No, nobody is excluding. Wait for some time, Vishnu. You will find very neutral textbooks coming out. There is absolutely, I'm not part of the NCERT or the textbook writing, but what I find is the previously written textbooks were definitely...
Okay, let me put this back to Professor Mukherjee, who's been waiting patiently. Ma'am, as a historian, is it a factual argument that ancient Indian history has not been adequately represented in our school textbooks in the manner in which, for example, Mughal history has been taught? Has there been an imbalance? Is that argument something which is factually tenable in terms of what the textbooks say?
I would assert that it is a completely false statement, and I'm willing to sit down with anybody across the table and show them page by page, chapter by chapter, that this is a false accusation. It's not true that the medieval India textbook is 400 pages and ancient India is 150. These are absolutely factually not correct statements. People, the lot of, by the way, the textbooks which are now being used and from which the deletions have been made, and none of those books have been written by a single scholar. There was a board of about 10 people, and each book, each chapter has been written by a different person. So there has been a big effort. These books were written about 10 years ago, headed by Professor Hari Vasudevan, who's no more, a very well-known Russian historian from the University of Calcutta. And then there were a large number of scholars who contributed, each chapter written by a different scholar. So there was maybe somebody did maximum 2 chapters somewhere, and they were all on themes. The idea was to bring a lot of diversity into the school textbooks, and these books have been appreciated. So and then I don't think that this is a correct charge at all that the ancient India has been neglected. I mean, even at the university level, you know, we have specialized departments of ancient Indian history and culture in many parts of India. So it's not true. I mean, the nationalist interpretation, not the British interpretation, the nationalist interpretation of Indian history, in fact, glorified ancient India, if anything. You know, so these are all, you know, I heard somebody the other day, my own vice chancellor, make a public statement saying the Maratha history has not been studied. I almost fell off my chair. I mean, from childhood, we've been hearing about Shivaji, Marathas, read it in every school book, every college book. We all know about the Marathas. We know the Marathas war. We know about Chhatrapati Shivaji. To say Marathas have not been studied, you know, the kind of statements that are made by responsible people today, complete falsehoods, I'm sorry to say. I wish people would sit across the table and argue with facts and the books in front of them. I'm willing to sit there and do that.
Professor Rajput, would you like to respond? The books and the curriculum is adequately distributed between a diverse set of opinions and ideas, specifically in history textbooks?
Definitely not. I am not a historian, but I know. But you said one point, and that is what I would like to respond. Both sides should be represented. Now, our books refuse to say that there is an opinion amongst historians that Aryan invasion theory was a myth. They said, no, we will not even mention it. They refuse to mention that Saraswati river ever existed, which has now been established by the scientific and investigations. Now, they were never ready to give the other viewpoint. And they are asking now that everything should be represented. You see the NCERT textbooks, there was definite bias which will be evident, and all those groups were constituted that way. You said that it can also be, the other side can also be accused. Fine, let the people decide, let the children decide, let the parents find out.
I'm not sure
we had tremendous amount of representations against our earlier books.
They will just study whatever it is. It's for adults like us, students of history, those who are professors of history, political science and sociology, to actually be the shining light. I think the question that needs to be asked is, in our India today, is that the model that we are following, or are we following political agendas which are one way or the other trying to dictate what kids learn? Look, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us. It's so wonderful to have a panel which doesn't shout and scream, but these are serious issues, and I do agree with Professor Mukherjee. We need to sit across the table, fact by fact go through whether children are being exposed or they're not being exposed to different facets of our diverse country. Take a short break, and we're going to move on to something completely different. Renewed concerns on healthcare. India is the global pharma. That is a fact. But now very strong reports from American health authorities saying that eye drops manufactured in Tamil Nadu by a leading Indian company may have caused the death of patients or some individuals in the United States. What's the true story? We'll be looking at that. Welcome back. In the latest setback for an Indian drug manufacturer, America's Center for Disease Control and Food and Drug Administration Authority have sounded an alert over an eye drop manufactured by a Chennai-based pharma company which they believe may, and I would stress the use of the word may, have caused the death of 3 individuals. The US FDA have since visited the manufacturer and have been very critical of manufacturing standards. The Tamil Nadu Health Authority and now the Government of India also, the drug regulator at the center, say the company's manufacturing standards have not been compromised. Now, the drug in question is called Ezricare. That's what it's called in America. It's an over-the-counter eye drop which was sold in America. Tests done by the US regulators indicate the presence of an extremely drug-resistant bacteria in samples of opened bottles of Ezricare. I might again repeat, the bottles were opened, right? And that's important. And we'll come to why. 3 people have been killed, and there have been reports of 8 people losing their vision following the possible use of these eye drops. Now, the American Center for Disease Control says Ezricare was the only common artificial tears product identified across 4 healthcare facility clusters, which is why they've raised this alarm. Now, highly drug-resistant bacteria, they say, was found in multiple lots of opened Ezricare bottles recovered from patients with and without eye infections. However, speaking to NDTV, the Tamil Nadu Drugs Control Director investigating Global Pharma, that's the Indian company, have said that there is no contamination in unopened bottles of the eye drop at Global Pharma's Tamil Nadu plant. There have been samples of several batches which have been analyzed. Raw materials used are of an acceptable standard. Now, the Tamil Nadu survey is in stark contrast to a survey of the plant which was done by the US Food and Drug Administration, which has extremely adverse findings on the quality of manufacture of eye drops in question. Now, the FDA, after a site visit, has stated that the company used a manufacturing process that lacked assurance of product sterility. The product may not have been sterile. There are no written procedures regarding aseptic techniques and behavior. So, the process of manufacture and the behavior of personnel in terms of ensuring everything is antiseptic in the environment where it is actually manufactured, question marks on that. No test to identify components used in a drug product. A drug product has many components. The US FDA says perhaps tests were not done to identify each of the components which were used. These are the American allegations. They've given a paper and handed it over to the company saying this is why they have problems. Now, from a larger standpoint, this is now the 3rd time in 6 months that Indian manufacturing drugs have been linked to deaths. In October 2022, the Gambia in Africa blamed India-made cough syrup for the death of 36 children. The World Health Organization was also involved in the process of raising these concerns. In December, just a couple of months back, Uzbekistan claimed that 18 children died after consuming Indian syrup. And now, in April, US authorities flagging possible deaths linked to Indian eye drops. Joining us now, Dr. Amita Gupta, Professor of Medicine and International Health and Director of the Johns Hopkins India Institute, Dr. Gopal Dabade, who was member of the All India Drug Action Network. We've got Prashant Reddy, who's a co-author of The Truth Pill, The Myth of Drug Regulation in India. He's joined me in the past as well. Dr. Rajiv Dasgupta, Professor at the Center for Social Medicine and Community Health at JNU. And we're also joined by Dr. Santosh Honawar, Director of Medical Services at the Center of Sight in Hyderabad. Thank you all very much for being with us. Dr. Gupta, if we look at the allegations, how important is it to differentiate between a drug which is a highly drug-resistant bacteria which is found in an open bottle or an open vial, and the possibility of it existing in an unopened bottle or vial? Because that's a key distinction as this story progresses. What's the importance of, or the difference between the two?
Yeah, so thank you for having me on your program today. So look, I think that the way we look at this is that this is an ongoing investigation and we don't have all the sort of primary data in front of us. What we do know is that there's, for the first time, this particular strain was identified in the United States of a highly multi-drug resistant Pseudomonas aeruginosa bacteria. And that's what tipped off the sort of alert surveillance system to investigate this further, because this was not a prevalent strain previously. And so what we then do is a case control study where you take individuals who have this bacteria and you compare them to people who don't, and you try to find what might be the common source among the cases and what differentiates them from the controls. So at least, as you were mentioning, there seems to be these eye drops that are a common product, at least with many of the cases. And as you rightly said, now the process of testing both unopened and open product is underway. So I think I would say we don't know yet what whether this was contaminated at the source, at the factory, along the distribution chain, or if it's something that has some susceptibility after opening. But what is unusual is the fact that we don't usually see this multi-drug resistant Pseudomonas bacteria. So it has to have entered into the eye drops in some shape or form, if that's indeed the most likely cause of this outbreak.
Prashant Reddy, I went through all the documents over here. I've seen what the FDA's site report actually of this plant had to say, and there were 11 observations, all extremely critical. And on the other hand, the Indian drug regulator and the Tamil Nadu drug regulator have said that no, this is fine, their manufacturing standards are absolutely okay. So how do I, as a possible user of this drug or anybody on this program, actually try and get an idea of what's right and what's wrong?
The problem with the Indian government and even the state drug regulators is that their reflexive reaction in all these cases is basically to deny any responsibility. Now, the thing that we need to take note of in this particular incident is that the US FDA has been raising concerns about manufacturing quality in India since 2007, since the Ranbaxy scandal broke open. Now, most of those cases had to do with rather pedantic observations of, you're not following this standard, that standard. They weren't able to conclusively establish harm to American patients. But this case appears to be changing that. If the US FDA's final investigation concludes that this product was responsible for deaths, the American government, the American Congress, I'm pretty sure, will take some strict action. Because if you remember the reaction of the Indian government post the Gambian incident, post the Uzbekistan incident, they have simply denied all responsibility. And in the Gambian incident, 70 children died, not 36. In Uzbekistan, 18 children died. So people are dying. The US FDA has been raising this for 15 years, and nothing is changing in India. The government of India is acting like there's absolutely nothing wrong.
But then,
so
Prashant, I just have one clarification over there. As I understand it, the drugs haven't been, they've voluntarily withdrawn 2 drugs, right? One is an eye ointment, one is an eye drop. They weren't ordered to do that. Now, if this is the case, then are we not getting ahead of ourselves at potentially saying that this company has been manufacturing killer drugs?
No, I'm not saying that. That has to be established after an investigation. But the US FDA's, the report that you just cited is quite scathing. There clearly appears to have been some quality control failures. But what I'm talking about is the perception globally about the Indian government's attitude towards pharma. We've dug ourselves into this nationalistic hole where any allegation we claim is an anti-India conspiracy, that now we are unwilling to accept responsibility in any case. And there are absolutely no visible changes that we have seen since the Gambian incident.
Dr. Dabade, would you agree with that there are no visible changes? As I understand it, in cases in Haryana where one of the drugs in the previous incident was being manufactured, there was some stringent action which was taken, or certainly in the other case as well, that there was intervention at the local level. Was that significant?
Thanks for inviting for this debate. This is a very important debate. And as regarding the Indian government's response, whatever is possible, I think they are trying to do, or that it appears that they are trying to do. But drug regulation is a very slippery road, and there are many pitfalls, I agree. And the drug regulatory authorities need to be eternally vigilant. There is no shortcut for that, because one has to understand that the drug companies always use the best brains that are available. And our regulatory authorities have to be much more skilled and much better equipped than the drug companies themselves. So every country needs to have these drug regulatory authorities on their toes, and that is the price for having these drugs. Now, I was telling about the US FDA. Even if you look back, there have been instances where contamination has occurred even in US. For example, I want to tell about this heparin,
Yes,
a drug used in
heparin, yes.
2008. And it was manufactured by Baxter International, US company. They have leased it out to the Chinese company, and 81 deaths occurred. Now, this is not the only one. And then, then there is, in 1982, Chicago Tylenol murders. And in again 2007, 2000 toothpaste contained diethylene glycol. And the New England Journal mentions 48 people died.
Yep.
New England compounding. There was methylprednisolone, which is used for epidural injection, was contaminated. And again in 2018, tetrazole was marketed. No, see, it's no use blaming the drug regulatory authorities. I think we need to build political pressure and ensure that these drugs are of safe and the consumer can use it safely. Now, if you look at the US FDA, which is supposed to be one of the best in the world, let's agree with that. Because if a drug gets clearance from US FDA, many countries look upon it as, okay, this is a standardized report. But there are a lot of pressures again on US FDA. Let us look at that.
Sure.
The drug industry has tremendous pressure.
Sure. I get, and thanks very much for raising that point about the pressure on the drug industry and the need to be ahead of them in terms of regulators. You know, Dr. Dasgupta, I want to talk about the larger point over here about highly drug-resistant bacteria, even ICU-borne bacteria, which are absolute killers. Now, the fact that a certain element of this has been found in these vials, and let's take that at face value because they've tested these, they found it, right? And there's a possibility of it spreading. How does the existence of these drug-resistant bacteria, particularly in ICU settings in India, represent a battle which the global community appears to be losing at some stages?
Thank you. Shifting the gaze to, and not the goalpost, to what you pointed at, the larger context is that the WHO has been championing a global patient safety action plan within which both quality of medicines, the regulation of the drug industry, as well as hospital or healthcare acquired infections are part of. And India is very much a part of this global patient safety action plan 2021-30, and India has backed it up with its own national patient safety implementation framework 2018-2025. So it is not that India is not alive to these challenges, these realities, and that the fact that India has a global commitment to patient safety, of which both manufacturing quality as well as healthcare acquired infections are very critical. The point is that establishing causality, and that's where the whole debate is, or the whole the tensions are. I myself, as you are aware, is a member of the National Adverse Events Following Immunization, that committee. Yes. Establishing causality or the quality of the primary investigation is extremely crucial, just like any other investigation, including crime investigations. Now, oftentimes we face challenges in the Indian context because the quality of the primary investigation is not very good, and then when it comes to the state or national levels, we are unable to confirm or reject it either way. But here, the FDA does seem to have undertaken some quality investigations, and therefore, while establishing a direct causality is very difficult, it's not something you can see under the microscope in the laboratory, like a lab test you do, and you can directly incriminate a drug or a vaccine. One essentially has to take in the weight of the evidence and make a sense of that evidence and respond accordingly. Thank you.
Dr. Gupta, would you like to sort of come in on the point that I'm trying to raise? Because it's essentially, even in this case, highly drug-resistant bacteria. We have a problem certainly in India. We've now got a certain strain which is there in the United States. This cannot be treated conventionally with existing antibiotics, for example, or other drugs. How does this represent a real threat? Because this is at the heart of this particular issue of alleged contamination.
Yes, well, I think that we have to recognize that the antimicrobial resistance is truly now one of the big threats that impacts health across the globe. And in a place like India, which has a large burden actually of carbapenem resistance, this is a particularly important antibiotic that's used for certain types of infections. And I'll give you just a comparison that 40% or so of infections in ICUs in India have been found to show evidence of carbapenem resistance, where we're sort of at the 2 to 3% in the United States for carbapenem resistance. This specific strain, isn't a bacteria that's commonly found in infection, Pseudomonas. But what's unusual about this is when they did some sequencing, they found specific elements of resistance that hadn't been previously identified in the United States. And so we have very, very few antibiotics that available to treat this infection. And we have to think about specific combinations. And this also results from a long-standing lack of investment to develop new agents for drug-resistant infections. It hasn't been previously a priority for pharmaceutical companies to develop new antibiotics because they much prefer to do lifestyle drugs or cancer drugs or other drugs because of the profit margins, et cetera. But I think this is really important for us to pay attention. This is not just a problem in India or the United States or elsewhere. This is a global problem that needs a global solution and needs new drug development and new solutions. But I think this outbreak highlights the few different important things. One is the infection. 2 is the manufacturing process, and 3, we need to ensure that we do a good job of getting the data, quality data, and making actionable effort to improve quality of manufacturing, if indeed that's what's found to be the source of this infection.
Dr. Honawat, I think a lot of our viewers would be asking that, we use eye drops all the time. In a place like Delhi, for example, air pollution is such a factor that, people use eye drops quite frequently to lubricate their eyes. And then you have a report which says that eye drops cause deaths or have caused deaths allegedly in America. So what are people watching this program expected to believe when they're told, just use an eye drop, a simple one?
Well, it's very rare in a general clinical setting getting contaminated eye drops and getting your eye infected. Going to the extent of removal of the eye and causing death is extremely rare, I would say. But the drop that we are talking about is a preservative-free eye drop. And any preservative-free eye drop has to be used in a particular way, and it has to come in a multi-dispenser vial which is tip-sealed. That is the way it is distributed. If that particular precaution is not taken in dispensing a drop, or if the drop gets contaminated by the user himself, then it is a concern. Otherwise, most of the drops that are used for general eye care purposes are having preservatives which will prevent contamination of the eye drop over a particular period of time, for 28 days, I would say.
And Dr. Honawat, what I'm trying to understand is, again, just as a layperson, how does an infection spread from one person to another in a particular community, even if there is a particular vial which is contaminated? Is it because, for example, contaminated eye drop may have fallen on linen and that ended up infecting somebody else? How does this infection spread?
It's mainly by cross-infection. If one person is infected and he touches his eye and touches anything else around him, and if somebody else touches the same contaminated area, then he can get that infection in his eye. So it's mainly by cross-infection.
Dr. Gupta, is that the sense in the United States? How, there have been several communities where many people have been infected. As I understand it, some people who've not even had a prior eye infection. So how is this actually spreading?
Yeah, so a lot of these drug-resistant infections can result in what we call can result on things in the environment. So if you're in a nursing home, somebody is using the drops, and then all of a sudden touches their eye, touches the railings, touches the sheets. Another healthcare worker comes and is helping to assist that patient. Then they have it on their hands. Technically, they're supposed to be doing hand washing, but we know things don't always happen in the perfect world. They go to the next room, and then they have it on their hands, and they start to sort of, work with the next patient. So that's one way you can get what we call nosocomial spread. So within the healthcare setting. In other scenarios, you can have this become an issue in the community where people might be in the same household or the like. So a little bit depends on how persistent these drug-resistant bacteria are in the environment, and as well as who all, how transmissible they are, once they're found. And the other issue is that some of them are carried in the stool, and there can be sort of, again, fecal-oral transmission. So a little bit will depend on Pseudomonas, for example, can reside in water and on surfaces, and so can be nosocomial transmitted in healthcare settings. And that's likely what happened in this scenario, that there were some people who used the eye drops, and then subsequently others got secondarily infected.
Yeah. Dr. Dasgupta, one final question to you. How does all of this, Uzbekistan, Gambia, and now America, affect India's reputation as the world's sort of global pharma, as it were?
Yes, it is true that India is a leader both in pharma, medicines, as well as vaccine production. Two things in the big picture need to be kept in mind at this point from India's point of view. One, that as the G20 president, India's presidency, and within the G20 health mandate, vaccines, therapeutics, diagnostics is a very important focus area. And therefore, India quickly needs to restore confidence in its pharma industry, particularly as India pledges to serve the global south as well as the G20 nations. And secondly, linking back to the antimicrobial resistance issue, as India prepares for its One Health mission, and India is certainly very committed to it, AMR is at the very heart of the One Health approach. And therefore, both within the One Health mission as well as within the G20, and then both are linked in some ways, India does have a very big responsibility, and one hopes that as a country and as a government and as the regulators will rise to the occasion.
All right. Look, I'd like to thank you all very much for joining us. This is an investigation which is still continuing in America, but the allegations are very strong that post the use of this eye drop manufactured by an Indian company, a fairly large Indian company, there have been deaths which have taken place in the United States. But the final conclusion, the last word, has not been written. Now, we have reached out, we have tried to reach out to the company in question, Global Pharma. We've sent them questions as well. They've not responded, and we would very much like to hear from them and believe that they do need to come on record. Now, we are out of time on this program. From all of us here, goodbye.